You know that a game has to be special to get its own video from me when that shit is years away from fully being released. If you've been around my channel long enough, you know that game would have to be a Final Fantasy game. And of course, it's the remake that people have been asking for years. Way longer than YouTuber has actually been fucking himself. Now, unfortunately, under time constraints, I wasn't able to get any Final Fantasy footage to use in the background. I mean, I could go and steal some fucking Final Fantasy shit off my channel from the Goodbye PlayStation 3 series and just mute it, or I could do what these other asshole news channels do. You know what I'm talking about? They take the fucking trailer, they loop it over and over and over again, and then state shit that people already fucking know. You ever see these motherfuckers? Of course you have, because you know the exact ones I'm talking about. Scumbags that hear any little detail about a game, they find any footage possible, and they rush out a video for views on shit a company or some other source has already fucking announced, all for the sake of money. Every game has a cocksucker like that, but I don't give a shit about that. Channels like that are the exact definition of vanity and greed. But anyways, this is not a video about those money-grubbing twats. It's about the most important game in video game history. You're damn right. I said it, and I'm going to prove my point about that a little bit later. But for Final Fantasy fans, by now it's common knowledge that Final Fantasy VII is being remade from scratch. Not just a remastered and re-released version like we've seen on consoles and PC over the past few years. We're talking a complete re-envisioning of the game, remaking it from the very beginning. A brand new game and experience that people can play all over again. For those of you that don't have no fucking clue what I'm talking about, don't worry, it's only the best damn video games that pretty much made PlayStation the dominant console since its inception. But anyway, since this past E3, Sony pretty much brought down the house with the announcement of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, coming to PlayStation 4 first, of course. I'm sure PC and Xbox are going to get the game as well, but when the announcement was made, pretty much every adult over the age of 25 who played the original game damn near lost their minds. No, really, have you seen the YouTube reactions to Final Fantasy Remake announcement? Grown-ass men fucking cried over the announcement.
You neutralized.
Some jumped around and cheered in disbelief. Shit, I was watching the conference live and my jaw dropped when that game was actually announced. The audience itself was in disbelief, so Sony truly came through on a surprise announcement that people have been clamoring for. Back when PlayStation 3 was given a technical demo of its power and whatnot, they showed a brief clip of what Final Fantasy VII's intro could look like, and fans thought the game was going to be re-released. Square Enix flattened that expectation and said that it was only a tech demo, so that wasn't a trailer to the actual game, but merely showing off what they could do. But naturally, fans asked for the game, because after all, what were the other fucking options? 3 games of Final Fantasy 13? Oh yeah, I'd much rather have 3 fucking games of lightning and snow and brain fucking stupid enemies instead of a Final Fantasy VII remake. What a great fucking idea that was. Whoever made that idea, man, seriously needs to be fucking fired over that shit. But anyway, that E3 conference just this past year finally gave fans what they were asking for. And this past weekend at the PlayStation Experience Conference, a mini E3 of their own just for Sony game, they showed off some tech gameplay for the very first time. And they made a side announcement, not during the keynote address, but that the game is going to be released in installments. It's not a full game yet, but will most likely be released in pieces over the years, and I'm going to address that a little bit later. But once again, fans went apeshit over the footage and the announcements. For gamers not familiar with Final Fantasy, you're probably wondering why a game like this receives such attention. I have to explain a little bit about it, because there are very few games where you'll see a grown-ass man act like a 5-year-old on Christmas morning, but this is one of those games. Now, there are 2 types of people that played Final Fantasy VII when it released. People who played the games on Super Nintendo, and people who had no clue what Final Fantasy VII was. Both walked away completely impressed with what Final Fantasy VII achieved back on PlayStation 1. Back in 1997, Nintendo was still king of video games. Sega had its popularity with Genesis and Sonic the Hedgehog as their mascot, and they carried that over to Saturn, which was their generational rival to the PlayStation. But Sony decided to roll out their first console against these two, and they came out with a CD-ROM based product, which wasn't a cartridge-based console like N64. The differences were clear at the time, and PlayStation had a huge technical advantage over Nintendo at the time. Sega released Saturn, which was technically a more powerful machine, but as history has shown, video games, you don't need to be the most powerful machine to win over buyers. You need games to impress buyers. Nintendo had Mario, Zelda, and Donkey Kong, which of course are timeless classics. Sega had Sonic, Virtua Fighter, and the Panzer Dragoon series, but Sony completely torched them with their early lineups. Crash Bandicoot was a pretty decent selling game at the time. Nothing major, nothing groundbreaking, but then that was followed up by Tomb Raider and Resident Evil as games only on CD-ROM. So they were both on PlayStation and Sega Saturn, but Nintendo was losing out on these games, ultimately losing out on console sales because other games, really cool games, were going to disc-based consoles. PlayStation was selling better than Sega, so they were winning on two fronts. They were winning the games war against Nintendo and the console war against Sega. But then all of a sudden, Nintendo struck gold with GoldenEye. If you want to see where modern shooters got their inspiration from, that was a masterpiece of a game. It propelled N64 sales for a month until Sony rolled out their big guns. Final Fantasy released 1 month after GoldenEye, and it completely changed the console war at that time. There was no argument at that point that disc-based games were superior. At the time, Final Fantasy cutscenes put other games to shame in terms of graphics. Final Fantasy size put other games to shame in terms of scope. The ability to put the game on 3 discs also showed what discs could do instead of old cartridge-based games. At that point, Nintendo realized they were fucked. Cartridges were going out the window, everything was going to be disc-based, and Final Fantasy was the nail in the coffin when it came to that decision. With Final Fantasy also being a console exclusive, Sega was fucked. They didn't have the game. Although they had the CD-ROM, they weren't able to get the license for Final Fantasy VII, and that's what Sony kept and held over them. So on top of Nintendo being fucked from a technical portion, Sega was fucked from a gaming portion. In the very first week, Final Fantasy sold 300,000 copies in North America, and word spread how great that game was. And granted, 300,000 copies is not a lot, especially at that time. But by December, over 1 million copies were sold. In addition to that, PlayStation sales doubled and tripled during that holiday. And as months grew, each month saw Final Fantasy VII at the top of the sales list, only toppled in 1 month, and that happened to be December, and the only game that topped it was Gran Turismo, PlayStation 1's greatest selling game of all time. The combination of Final Fantasy VII and Gran Turismo watched PlayStation 1 outsell Nintendo and Saturn combined by quadruple in sales. Gran Turismo had its major sales in December, the month it released, but Final Fantasy kept selling throughout the year. People were buying PlayStation 1 consoles just to play that game, and it's credited as being the game that sold PlayStation 1. It was also a game that made Japanese RPG games part of mainstream, and a big reason why people wanted to play RPGs at the time and bought other crappy RPGs hoping they would find the same success as Final Fantasy VII. And keep in mind, Final Fantasy VI was still widely considered to be the best Final Fantasy game to date, and many people had no fucking clue about the game. The people that actually played Final Fantasy VI came over to Final Fantasy VII and were in awe, complete awe. It went from a 2D 16-bit game to the masterpiece that was a 3D game on the Sony console. The people who never played Final Fantasy VI really had no idea what the game was like. It was actually Final Fantasy III for those who are in the United States. Hey, I'm not going to get into the whole numbering shit, but for those that bought Final Fantasy VII as their first Final Fantasy game, again, they were in awe. How could you get this much content in the game? How could you get these graphics in the game? Final Fantasy VII blew people away who played the series before and who never touched a Final Fantasy game in their life. There is no question this was the game that put PlayStation at the top when it comes to sales. There is no doubt this was the game that people bought a console just to play. The success of Final Fantasy VII sent PlayStation to the top of the sales charts, and the release of their next games were always beyond hyped. Being console exclusive, you had to have a PlayStation in order to play Final Fantasy. Ultimately, the exclusives that PlayStation had, the bad decisions that Sega made with the Saturn and Dreamcast led to their downfall. Nintendo's stubbornness to not rely on third parties for games put them behind the 8 ball in terms of sales. And then when Microsoft finally introduced Xbox without a Final Fantasy series, that put them way behind in sales when it started against the PlayStation 2. One game did that. That's why it's so important. That's why people have an affection for this game like no other. For many players, it was the reason they bought a PlayStation 1 and stood with the franchise the entire time. For many Final Fantasy players, this was the game that introduced them to the series, or at least made them curious as to how far can consoles be pushed at the time. So when you see the reactions of these grown-ass men crying like a bunch of bitches, it's because it reminds them of how their hobby got started. It's the nostalgia of a game whose notoriety has never been duplicated, other than maybe Halo. No game can say they sold more consoles, and even then, Halo can't say they pushed Xbox to the top for chart sales, because it never did. 360 wasn't the top seller in early years because of Halo, it was because of Sony's bad decisions that opened up that door. But Sony probably wouldn't have won the console war with PlayStation 1 without that game. They probably wouldn't have jumped out to their amazing PlayStation 2 sales lead without the help of Final Fantasy. So to see the remake on stage 19 years later is why so many people are excited. Whether you were a kid back then when you actually first played the game, or you were a teenager back then when you first played the game, chances are if you were a teenager back then, you probably have kids of your own right now wondering why their dad just lost his mind over a fucking video game.
Bravo, team.
This is a game a generation of gamers played and they're shocked to see back in action. That's why it is so revered. That's why the game is so loved, because of the nostalgia of all of it. Which brings me to my final point about the game. Expectation. I hate to say this. I really do hate to think about this because of how much I love this game, but it's destined to fail. No matter what Square Enix does, no matter how much they try to avoid this, but the remake of this game is going to run into a catch-22 proposition of being damned if they do or damned if they don't. Ultimately, this game is going to piss off a large set of fans, and there's just no way around that. There are some people who will want to see the charm of the original game and will feel that the updated nature of the game is not true to the original. There are fans that probably haven't played the original or didn't play it all those years ago, who will wonder, why does this game receive such attention the way it does? They will feel it's overrated, it feels old, it's not a good game, certainly not up to the standards of the current generation players. So Square has the task of trying to balance out who do they want to piss off most. Do you want to piss off the people holding on to nostalgia, who are probably the ones jumping up and down and crying at the announcement? Or do you want to piss off the people who are wondering why these fucking idiots were jumping up and down? That sounds like an easy choice, but keep in mind, 19 years is a long time between games, and there are a shitload of people who never played this game before, so it has to appeal to all players, not just a select few. The longtime fans will probably be the most vocal critics of the game because they want it to feel like the original. I mean, if they got rid of the Don Corneo mission, there's going to be a fucking riot. If Sephiroth comes across as a shitty bad guy, there's going to be a riot. I'll be fucking pissed off about that one. But if they confuse the fuck out of people with the story they told the first time, they're going to have a hard time explaining to people what they wanted to accomplish in the first place. Personally, I can't wait to play this game. I can't wait to see a game I grew up on come back to life and see the reception it gets, because you can all but guarantee there are companies that will see the reaction and sales of this game and ask themselves whether or not they can recreate the magic of their older games. Resident Evil is just the one asking for a reboot. I mean, you could just see fucking Capcom licking their chops over this one. You know, even with this game being announced as episodes or multi-releases or whatever the fuck it is, I really don't have a problem with that. Considering the amount of content the game had back then, I mean, we're talking 35 hours alone just for the campaign, an additional 50 hours for fucking side missions, I'm perfectly fine paying for parts of the game like this if they come through on the delivery. You know, I wouldn't do that for any other game. Shit, I didn't do it for fucking Metal Gear with that one fucking chapter being sold ahead of time, but I certainly would do it for a Final Fantasy game if it's on point. If it allows us to play parts of the game now, parts of the game later, other than having to wait 7 fucking years for this game to fully be completed. If they were able to complete it in portions, I would certainly play those portions and wait for the next portion to come out, because I don't want to see this game sit in development hell for 6 fucking years, sort of like The Last Guardian of this motherfucker. But no matter how you look at it, no matter what, this game really is set up for failure, and you can just see it coming. You can see that the fan reaction is probably not going to meet the extreme expectation a game like this is being hyped to, but at the same time, a beloved 20-year-old game coming back to life is just something you don't fucking see. It's something rarely seen, but now that it's being done, I hope players go out there and enjoy it. I know it'll never be as amazing as the first time I played it, I admit that, but damn it, I plan on enjoying every minute of this game as soon as it comes out. And I'm telling you right now, Square Enix, you better bring that fucking snowboarding minigame back. Oh man, that shit was entertaining, along with all the gold source and minigames and this shit. Bring all that shit back. I don't give a fuck how serious you turn this game. You need to bring all that shit back, because if you leave that shit out, that's when you take the heart of this game out this motherfucker. Anyways, as soon as Square Enix announces Final Fantasy VII's release date, I will be sitting in line waiting for that motherfucker. Midnight release, you can't imagine. As soon as this game comes out, that is all you're going to see me play, because this is a game that I have been waiting for 19 fucking years, and I can't wait to see it remade. And I'm pretty sure all the people around my age group, all the people that played this game back in the day, know exactly how I feel when it comes to this motherfucker, so I'll guarantee I'll probably see you playing that shit. So as always, rate, comment, subscribe, and all the good shit, and I'll see you guys in the next video.